Hello everyone, Leah here. In today's video, we're going to be looking at different ways that you can create texture with acrylics. But before I get started, I want to select a color palette. And for that, I use the Art Blox Box. Currently, while doing my creative exploration with abstract, I find having something on the page to take away that blank page bright white helps. So what I'm doing here is using one of the techniques that I showed in a previous video, where I am painting on a surface and then transferring the paint to the paper. This is just giving it something that there isn't just white, so I can start layering on top of things. If you prefer, you guys can start with a blank page or paint the whole thing a solid color or anything like that, but it's just something that I like to do. I oftentimes will grab one of my colored pencils and just blind draw something, like one of my dried leaves that I have in the studio. Now, this first item that I'm going to show you that you can create texture and marks with is a catalyst rubber brush where they have little lines in it. However, just because I have this doesn't mean that you yourself can't try this technique out first at home with a fork. So you'll want to use a fork that you aren't technically going to ever eat with again. But if you have an extra or an item from an old set or something like that, grab one and use it. And for the technique that you can see right now on the screen, I have this huge palette knife that I'm just putting the paint right on so I can scrape it onto the paper to create a very interesting texture. But if you don't have something this large, you have other things that you can use. All you need is a flat surface that has a large area that you can use. Because what you want is what we're going to show next, is not only can you get this really interesting texture with the thick paint, but we're going to use these two items to create marks within the solid area. So I'm starting off with just using the end of a paintbrush and making squiggly lines. If you're doing this for a painting, you could draw shapes in it. You can do anything. You could even sign your name at the bottom of your canvas if you're, selling your items, your artwork. And if you want, you can try with other solid pointed items as well. I'm just using these two because they're the ones that I have readily available with me here in my studio. And try different sizes and shapes as well, because while doing this, could see just how different I was getting my markings from using a thick paintbrush to a really fine tipped palette knife. Now, after I did all this exploration and playing around, I was like, ooh, I don't really like what I drew, so I'm just gonna wipe it away. Which is something that I think is great with doing this kind of exploration, is that what we're doing isn't about creating perfection. It's about exploration and trying ideas out. If we don't like them, scribble it out, paint over it, rub it in, do something to get rid of it, or even just rip the page out and start again. For the next mark making that I'm going to be doing for adding texture with my acrylic paints is using one of these catalyst tools. Technically, I think it's supposed to be used for doing clay and things like that. I didn't originally like having this item. I was regretting buying it because I never used it. But I'm trying to get myself to use these items that I have around the studio and comparing it as well to other things that I have, like using the wedge blade or brush. I think it's called a wedge brush. Texture brush? I don't know, these things that have the little different edgings in them. And they create really interesting textures. So if you don't have a fork, or you don't have these items, or you don't want to go out and buy one right away, try even cutting up an old gift card and putting little shapes in there and seeing what you can get. But let's not forget as well, when it comes to texture, you don't have to use objects that are fancy or DIY. You can just use paintbrushes that you have, but use them in a different way. So instead of picking the paint off of the palette or, anything like that, do what I did. Put the paint directly onto your brush and then just like rummage it around, squish it down and just move it on the page and see what kind of texture you can get from the bristles of the brush alone. Especially if you have different types of brushes, because some of them are stiffer, thicker, made with different materials, so you can get different types of textures. Now, I am going to do that transfer technique again, but because I am using a thick bodied paint, I'm going to have some really interesting texture that's going to pop up versus if I had painted, say, my watercolors from when I did this in my part 1 video. And I'm going to actually zoom in later and show you guys how all this texture looks, so you don't have to worry about going, but I don't really see it, because I recognize that I'm using a dark color to match with the color palette that I selected ahead, so you might not really be able to see the kind of texture that I'm creating at this moment. Now, I am going to go back and redo the thick paint that I laid down and then go in again and redraw with it again. This is something that could even create some interesting dynamic visuals as well. So if, for example, you painted the page, say, bright pink, and then you did this technique where you laid down the thick paint and then drew through it with a paintbrush, you will be able to see the paint that was underneath it versus what's on top, which could be really interesting and fun to play with when you're doing your creative exploration, or even just for any paintings that you're creating. Just remember, this isn't about creating perfection or final pieces. This is all about having fun and exploring. Now that we've gone to this point, let's take a moment to just look at the textures up close and see the kind of effects that we're able to create with these techniques that I've shown you today. Exploring different ways to create texture with your acrylic paints is a fun exercise to really get to know yourself as an artist and to get to know your tools and paints, and just to really explore the things that you have around you. If you don't have the exact same tools that I have, like these Princeton Catalyst items, you can find other things that you might have around your house, like leftover product packagings from products that you purchased, really hard cardboards that you can cut up and create shapes with, or blank gift cards that you can also cut and make shapes with. If you have any dried flowers around, you can use those to create textures, though I do recommend being a little safe with the dried ones because, petals can fall off and then stick into the paint, unless that's something that you're into. Then you could also see if you like that kind of texture creations as well. Before I say goodbye, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video, and for all of my subscribers who have been taking part in the poll I have up on my community page for which Art Blox box they prefer. So if you are new here or you haven't seen that poll yet, let me show you what I'm talking about. As you saw at the beginning of the video, I selected my color palette from the Art Blox box by picking this card. But I've also created 2 different types of box options that I'm going to be taking the Art Blox box to for Kickstarter. And they are the magnetic lift box open and the lift lid option. And I want you guys to vote to tell me which one you think is the best box type that you would love to see these cards in. So if you want, head to my community page and vote for it. If you have any comments or questions about today's tutorial or any suggestions for other ways that textures can be made, let me know in the comment section below. Let's start a discussion on creating texture and exploring our acrylic paints. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you are new to this channel and you're interested in exploring creative art, using art as a tool towards healing, and learning more about art supplies, hit that subscribe button because that's all that I'm about here. And until next time, everyone, stay magical.